Before that time.
That's the physics behind, for example,
Another question
reactions.
people
The
ask
actual change in mass.
under the ultimate question about
During
profits.
over the course of the
Right.
7 years
Now,
which the book was put together.
Welcome to the Scholars Chair. Tonight, a conversation with Professor Emeritus of the University of Maryland, Dr. Joe Oppenheimer. He and I will review an essay written by American philosopher William James. The topic of the essay is The Will to Believe. James argued against the skeptic for the rational justification of faith. Our review right here in the Scholars Chair.
Let the conditions of inequality that we suffered under, when we are the oppressor, the dominant class, let's not impose that injustice on the others.
Anybody think that you could have a just system without giving women their rights?
Everyone has an opinion, and we sit around the marketplace and talk about opinion, but what is true?
With the shareholder, their goal is similar to the business, to maximize profit.
That belief becomes a context for a development of knowledge.
Say physics is the DNA of technology because the rules for how you build new technology starts in physics.
Because Quran challenges the people. It's not only the people of the book, it challenges Muslims.
We say secular, they hear godless.
Right.
What was intended?
Watch the Scholars Chair every Monday night. And here is your host. Dr. Oppenheimer, welcome to the Scholars Chair.
It's great to be back.
Thanks for coming back again. I wanted to ask you about this guy that we're going to review, William James. Early modern period, or at least mid-modern period, right, from the 1800s to 1910?
Yep.
Yes, and he is right in the middle of the American Revolution, right? Or actually...
The Industrial
Revolution.
After the Civil War.
Yes, sir. Right. And I was wondering whether that played any part of his on his philosophy at all.
Well, I think here's this guy. He was by his own admission, he was what he called a radical empiricist. He must have been hounded by people as a radical empiricist. When he said he also had religious beliefs. And I think to some extent that was very much the mainstream of most Americans at that time, who were very much oriented toward both religion and the fruits of industry, which seem to be coming from empirical sciences and engineering.
Yes, sir. So he's got this community. It's almost as if he's talking to a community of scientists, but yeah. a little both, right? He wrote in his essay, "The Will to Believe," was he thought that his paper, his speech that he was giving that day at Yale, was a justification for faith, a defense of our right to adopt the believing attitude about religious matters. Is he setting the stage for us?
I'd love it if you gave the next phrase too, which was, yes. In spite of the fact that our merely logical intellect may not have been coerced. Yes. And that I found one of the most puzzling, and I think I wouldn't have tripped on it except that you had indicated that why would he write it that way? And so that was a conundrum to me. And I started thinking about it, and I was thinking about both of us as fathers. How would you feel like if, let's say in your living room we're chatting, and you say the baby's asleep, right? And I say, gee, are you sure? How do you know? And you say, I put her down, and I'm sure she's asleep. And I'd say, you wouldn't say you'd know that the baby's asleep on that basis. You might say you believe the baby's asleep, right? Yes. And at some level, what he's playing with is knowledge. How do you know something? And traditionally, knowledge is understood as justified true belief. Yes. So you could know, you could believe the baby's asleep, and you could even be right, but you wouldn't know it unless you had some justification for it.
Yes, yes.
And I think he's arguing that he is trying to give us reason to be comfortable in accepting faith as a claim as a way of justifying what we might want to call religious knowledge.
I was fascinated with your answer because I thought that what he was doing throughout the paper was actually giving the definition of epistemology, and I thought that was just solid on, you know. And I think it also is, as we had talked about earlier, that religion for many people is a cognitive category. It's not just a moral ethical category, and you verified it.
And certainly for him it was.
Yes.
It was, how do I know that? And he was trying to justify it, I think, in what he viewed as a sea of skeptics.
Yes, and I think he's right. They're still with us, the skeptic. He also wrote the lawfulness of voluntary adopted faith. Would you think it correct to suggest that he is declaring that all human beings, as a rational option, can adopt belief? It's part and parcel. For example, our definition of epistemology is a part and parcel that you have to believe in order to come up with additional knowledge, and that makes us human. I was just curious whether.
I think
that was what I was getting at when I wrote that question.
I think that's an overstepping of where he would go.
Okay.
That is, I think that he would say that there are many humans who won't do that, right? Mm-hmm. But that he's really talking about this to the scientific community, mm-hmm. the community that really believes in empiricism. Mm-hmm. And he's saying to them that it is necessary for you to allow for this other category. Mm-hmm. And I think this is really important to him because if we go back to science again, and I think this will become clearer as we continue the conversation, but we go back to science, it is almost a moral commandment that you don't make up your stories. You don't distort the facts in order to prove your hypothesis. Yeah. You have a moral obligation to really figure out what is the truth. Mm-hmm. And he is saying, and therefore to say, I have faith that there's no global warming, mm-hmm. is, for example, trash as far as he's concerned, right? Yes, yes. And he's saying we have to, however, allow for faith in certain kinds of knowledge claims. Mm-hmm. 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 And those kinds of knowledge claims are really apart from science. Mm-hmm.
I think that you're right in the assessment. I saw there was a statement that he contributed to an immature a skeptic. He says that to say this is immature. He said faith is when you believe in something you do not know ain't true. This is his phrasing of what a skeptic would say. And I don't think the people who are partakers of a faith tradition actually believe that what they believe is not true.
Absolutely not.
Yes.
And I think he is arguing that faith is. So let's go back. Mm-hmm. Let's go back to what knowledge is, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Justified true belief. Mm-hmm. So he's saying that not only would it be true belief, but that faith for him is a form of justifying it when you find a form of justifying the knowledge mm-hmm. that you don't find if you don't have the faith.
Yes, that's right. Faith helps one to extend knowledge.
Right, that absolutely you don't get it without the faith.
Yes, sir.
It opens a door, so to speak, mm-hmm. to a view of the world, the universe, the situation we're in, yes. And that situation has a legitimacy mm-hmm. in the world of knowledge that comes about, that you can see through faith.
Interesting. So tell me, what is James' definition for faith?
We're back on that, right? So I think he doesn't have a definition of faith.
Yes.
I don't know what you feel about that. My feeling was, I looked at that pretty carefully.
Yes.
I felt he didn't have a definition of faith, but that he uses it in a certain manner, which is very similar to the way a scientist is using data and logic to say, okay, because of the data we have, we can trust our notion of evolution, and therefore, you know, the viruses are going to evolve to no longer be affected by these antiviral drugs, etc. And so that's a use of data and logic to get to an implication that they, and I think he uses faith in an analogous fashion for information that you can't get without it.
But I think your analysis is dead on. The question that James proposes: can our will either help or hinder our intellect in its perception of truth? Now we're
right.
talking.
Now, and here, I don't know how you felt about it, but there was a big chunk of this essay that was very technical. He even said, I have to get all this technical information out first. I'm not sure that maybe because we've moved on so much from that point, philosophically and scientifically, that it wasn't so necessary. But for him, he talks about hypotheses as being either live or dead. And live hypotheses are those that you're willing to entertain as possibly true. And dead ones you sort of dismiss. They're sort of, you might dismiss it because culturally it's just not. So for example, let's take an example that's clear. American medicine tends to dismiss acupuncture. Right? Even though in many countries it's accepted. Here, many people who are doctors would say, forget it, it doesn't work. Or it has no basis in justification in treating diseases. And he's saying you have to accept a hypothesis as possible. And that's what makes it either live or dead. If you reject it, it's dead. And that openness is what he would say is what's determining, or how our will determines what we accept in reality and our explanation of it.
That's interesting. Now, I had associated our will to be an action, the will to act, right? And I just thought that the will to act cannot help or hinder our notions of truth, right? I think that you have to have a perceived philosophy of a perceived truth before you can act. That was my take on it. Could be absolutely wrong, but I liked the way it was shaping, at least in my imagination. But James went on to another question. He said, can we by just willing, believe the reality is a myth? Now, I think this was taken off and reshaped by me when he talked about a picture of Lincoln can be perceived either as being something of a reality,
and whether two $1 bills can be two 20s.
That's right.
And you would sort of want to say, and he takes the position that, oh no, you can't do that for something so clearly, but that's
clearly wrong.
Yeah, clearly wrong, but that's also clearly false. I mean, let's look at the world that we have. And you see that the deniers of, for example, global warming, the deniers of the Holocaust, the deniers of one thing after, look at how Trump has made his campaign.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
The Mexican government is shipping over nothing but
and rapists.
Yeah. I mean, it has nothing to do with reality.
Yeah.
And yet, by saying it, he has a sufficient authority so that the people who want to believe that can believe it. And this is very much what also is true in religious fervent movements that sort of go amok.
And the same for extreme notions of science as a way of life.
Right.
So he makes the argument. Tell me, what do you think about James' depiction of Pascal's wager? Tell me your thoughts about that.
So actually, my mind is still on the first one.
Go right ahead.
I just want to make one more little comment on
right
that.
ahead, Dr.
So I have a son who made movies about the situation in Indonesia in the 60s, where they killed about 1 million people who they claimed were communists. And the myths that they used to justify that changed reality. I mean, by killing 1 million people, you change reality. It's like what happened in Rwanda. So, you know, not only can you create these myths about reality, but they have real implications that then change reality, right?
Change people's reaction in response to it.
Yeah, and therefore where we live, right?
Yes, yes. Interesting.
So now we're at Pascal's wager. So Pascal's wager was, the wager itself was that, of course, you have to believe, it is rational to believe in God, and it's irrational not to.
Right.
And the reason it's irrational not to is that the consequences of not believing in God for Pascal, who was a Catholic, would be that you would be eternally condemned to hell.
Right.
And that, so to speak, prize for that wager, or that outcome on that wager, would be sufficiently bad so that no matter what small probability existed that God existed, you should bet on God. Now, James sort of poo-poos this, right?
Right.
Because he's not Catholic. He doesn't see this as being the linkage. You're not going to hell just because you don't believe, and therefore you don't have to place, the bet is irrelevant. And even then he says you wouldn't be concerned about the bet if you weren't already predisposed to believing the Catholic doctrine is possible.
Right. And I think that you jump to my next question. Actually, it is that it says it is evident that unless there is a pre-existing tendency to believe, the option offered to the will of Pascal is not a living option. Not meaningful. And I think, and I was wondering whether he was getting at the human being's necessity to believe, period, and we could almost believe what Pascal is proposing, because his belief system is proposing an idea that he can either accept or reject.
We might disagree on this substantially.
Sure.
I didn't think he felt that human beings had to believe. I think he felt that it's almost sort of the opposite of Pascal's wager. You may be a believer, you may not be a believer. You may have faith, you may not have faith.
I see.
If you have faith, I'm telling you now, says William James, there are rewards that you will get from it that you will never get without having faith.
I see.
And without having it specified to any particular religion, he said all of the religions that he was talking about really were about the notion of the eternal, the perfect, what we might want to call the beauty of the spheres, right? And that's what religion was all about. But he said that I think he also argued that the same kind of faith was needed for moral questions and for questions having to do with human relations. So, for example, you have to have faith that the person who you are going to team up with in life loves you.
Yes.
And there's no way of empirically knowing that, but you have to reciprocate it. You also have to. And if you don't open up to that, you don't receive the love.
This is part and parcel about trust.
Yes.
Yeah,
I was thinking to myself, he would have been somebody who would have loved game theory, but he died 50 years too early.
The trust of the partner you're involved with. Interesting analysis, Professor Oppenheimer. James asserts in his essay the whole system of loyalties which grow up in the schools of science go dead against its toleration, so that it is only natural that those who have caught the scientific fever should pass over their opposite to the opposite extreme. And write sometimes as if the irrecorruptibly truthful intellect ought positively to prefer bitterness and unacceptability in the heart of its cup.
Yeah, well, so I'm really glad you read that. I'm really glad you read that, because at some level, that the people out there who are listening to this will have some sense of how difficult some of the sentences were, and how difficult his way of putting the question or the statements were for us to sort of parse.
Yes.
But my take on that sentence is that he was here talking about those people who grow up in the sciences, right?
Right.
So he's talking about scientists.
Yeah.
And he's saying they have to have no tolerance for mucking around with
faith and belief and all that.
Faith and belief in their work. You don't tell me you believe that medicine is distributed throughout the body by going through the stomach and then going into the bloodstream. You either prove it, or show it, or forget it. You know, that was a famous conjecture in pharmacology that nobody believed until it was proven by a very quick set of experiments. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And he's saying it's natural for those people who've caught the scientific fever to pass over to the opposite extreme. That is, I don't want to hear about faith. I don't want to hear about belief that you can't show me empirically it's the case. That, he says, robs you of the ability to see these things that I think in our culture right now is being called spiritual, right? Things about beauty, things about what's right to do, things about godliness and so on, a whole class of things for which you can't really make empirical arguments. And he's saying that those people would pass over to the opposite extreme, deny it, right? And write sometimes as if the incorruptibility, truthful intellect ought positively to prefer the bitterness of not believing in beauty and morality and all these kind of things, so that they can keep, hold of their purity in scientific matters. But notice scientists aren't like that.
Yes, I agree with this. When I read that, I immediately thought about Sir Isaac Newton and his religious fervor of wanting to see unity in the universe, and thusly he started to look at the laws of the universe in a unified way. The universal laws of motion, for example, coupled with gravity. And I thought that that idea was very interesting to me, that he starts with an idea of faith and then starts to, and that idea starts to help him interpret the natural world, I think.
And I would say that informed is maybe, that motivated a lot of science. A lot of science had to do with, how do I get to understand the incredible complexity that we have so that I can appreciate it and see its beauty or its spirituality or its origins, depending upon what the person was. Look, Einstein fought against Heisenberg, right?
Yes.
With this great comment God doesn't play dice. Right? Where did God come in his science, right? It obviously played a role.
Yes, right? Help them to assess. I agree with that. Well, you know, this particular idea is one that is very challenging. Let me see here. Yes, here it is. The question of having moral beliefs at all or not having them is decided by our will. I found that very difficult to assess, but maybe that's what he's doing. Are our moral preferences true or false, or are they only odd biological phenomena, making things good or bad for us, but in themselves indifferent? How can our pure intellect decide? If our heart does not want the world a moral reality, our head will surely never make you believe in one.
And his next sentence, actually, or somewhere in the next paragraph, is a statement that whatever position you have on that, you'll never be able to persuade somebody of the opposite position. And I don't know what your position is. I have a position on that that I've actually staked out, which is I'm what you would call a moral realist. I believe that that by the nature of our being, that is, as we are humans, there is a built-in sort of moral tissue that comes naturally to us as human beings. And I understand that you could say, how could you believe that and see that the behavior in, let's say, of people in ISIS, or how could you believe this and see the behavior of the Christians at in the time of the Spanish Inquisition and so on and so forth, right? But I think it really is all the same story. I think it is the case that if you are faced with a way of understanding your moral problem that takes you, in a sense, a little bit outside of your own shoes, which we all really have that capacity to do, you do see the same moral story.
Yes. The moral and ethical story, or I guess the struggle, in my opinion, for moral and ethical certainty is, I believe, the struggle of all human beings, and we do have to work at it. There is no negotiating that. Would you concur?
I think that's true too. That is, I think it is a real struggle, and I don't know whether you get certainty.
Yes.
Because all of our situations are so complex, right?
Yes.
So you can see that there's this side and that side.
Yes. The certainty, as I intended, is the struggle for. You never obtain it.
That's right.
Yes.
And actually, he talks about that too in science.
Yeah.
Right. He talks about two kinds of. It's important to notice here. This guy was the founder of this thing called radical empiricism.
Yes.
And he then says, look, there's a difference between my radical empiricism and absolute empiricism. In the absolute empiricists, he said, think that they can say, we know this. We found it to be true, and it is true.
Joseph, you have totally nailed this for me. Thank you for coming to the Scholars Chair, and I wish we had another hour, but they're giving me 30 seconds. So tonight we have interviewed and reviewed an essay written by American philosopher William James titled The Will to Believe, with Professor Joe Oppenheimer, Emeritus, University of Maryland. You can see more Scholars Chair interviews on read1communications.com. I am Khalil Shadid. Good night.
Hit it! Hit it! Hit it!
amazing.